What's up, YouTube? Welcome back to Celio's Network. Today I have the Dallas Regionals 2020 meta discussion with three guests to talk about what we think the metagame is going to look like at Dallas Regionals and maybe some of the decks we think are good and how we think it might play out. Before we get into the discussion, I want to shout out PotownStore.com and FlipsideGaming.com. And why don't y'all introduce yourself? We'll go Michael, Tate, and Will.
I'm Michael Catron. I'm sponsored by Nerd Rage Gaming. I write for Someone's PC, but we haven't been doing articles recently. I'm not sure when we're going to pick it back up. I've had a pretty good season so far. I'm in top 16, not sure where, and that's about it.
Cool.
I'm Tate Whitesell, probably best known as the creator of PokeStats. Been playing for about 3 years. Haven't seriously chased a Worlds invite yet. Probably going to do that next year because I don't think I can make it to London this year. My next event's Collinsville. So even though I'm not going to Dallas, I feel pretty prepared for it. I've been helping people test. Member of Team Gentlemen and Scholars as well. So been testing a lot with all those guys.
Cool.
How's it going, everyone? My name is Will Jenkins. I'm a player from the DMV area. I'm currently in top 16. I'm sponsored by Queen City Gaming and the PTC Geo Store. And my next event is Dallas, so let's talk about it.
Great. So I wanted to get a feel for what we all think the most popular archetypes are. These questions can get a little bit mundane, and I don't want to have us all just copy paste the same answers. So why don't we just go in a circle until we have like the top 6 or 7 most popular decks. We'll go Michael, then Tate, then Will, and then just circle around. Just name one of the most popular decks you think we'll have.
All right, Turbo Dark.
Dark, great.
Zorogarb.
Zorogarb?
Yeah.
Mewtwo.
Mewtwo and Mew.
The tag team toolbox deck.
Hell yeah.
Guardian.
Yeah. Ultra Necrozma.
Ultra Necrozma.
Potentially Egg Rowlet.
Okay. Is there one worth mentioning as a 7th, or is that all the popular ones?
I don't know. Buzzgarb, maybe.
Buzzgarb or Pika, I guess. Those would be the other two.
Say like Night March or Vespiquen as well.
Yeah.
Okay. A lot coming in at number 7.
Yeah.
Possible single prizers or possible other turbo deck. Okay. Actually, let's start there. Will, you said Pika, right?
No,
I did.
Okay, so Pika. Though Pika isn't one of the ones I've been hearing thrown around a lot, but I do think it's possible. Do you want to talk about why you think that could have some popularity?
I actually think Pika's really, really good. My top pick right now. The deck can kind of deal with everything except for really strong single prizes like Ultra Necro, so that's a bad matchup. But it's notoriously just favorable against Zorogarb because you're faster than them and your tag bolts let you outtrade them. Dark's a pretty good matchup because you usually actually opt second and then try and kill a GX on turn 1, and then you tag bolt on turn 2 to finish the game. And then you're a lot faster than anything else, and with tag bolt it lets you take extra prizes one turn where other decks can't, and since they can't, you win almost every prize trade.
Okay, cool. Does anyone have a rebuttal about Pika ROM, like a disagreement on it being a good play, disagreement on it being popular?
No, I agree with Pika being a good play. It's something I've tested a lot, and I consider it one of my top picks. The only rebuttal I guess I could see to it is it could get collateraled by decks playing Mr. Mime or Mew on Broken Bonds to counteract Mew GX's explosiveness by wiping the board on its turn 1. But I mean, that's really the only thing. I agree with a lot of what Michael said.
Would you be worried about collateral with Turbo Dark counters with
That's
fighting
what I was
type?
going to say, was if people start playing fighting for Dark and Zora, it hits Pika as well. But
I don't think Dark's actually that big a deal. Most of the Dark decks are like Lucario based, and you actually have a pretty decent ways to deal with Lucario. The deck should be playing a Marshadow, so Buzzwole's not a big issue because you can just red knuckle for the knockout. But Lucario, you have Tag Bolt, and it's pretty easy to chain Guzma, so you just kill the Riolus, and it's hard for them to get the proper knockouts. And then through stuff like either Scoop Up Cyclone or Cassius, you can heal any chip damage they do. And again, tag will let you swing a lot of prize trades into your favor that you otherwise wouldn't. And then you can also play Flash Energy just to negate weakness and make the matchup pretty easy in general.
Yep.
Cool. And Will, another one of kind of the lower ones on our popularity there. You mentioned Night March or Vespiquen. Did you want to mention either of those and why you think they could have some popularity behind them?
Sure. Most of the time, anytime a new set releases, Night Marcher and Vespiquen kind of creep back into the format somehow. They've notoriously just been some of the best single prize attackers to hit the game in the modern era, and they can trade well with other decks. And the only reason that it's not like tier 1, I think, right now is because your Ultra Necrozma matchup isn't amazing since they do more damage and have more HP, and then they're just unbelievably fast. They have Silent Lab, so your turn 1s can become lackluster. They don't rely on Shamans or Dedenis to set up, so you can just like, if the Night March doesn't clear them with Perilicity, you can just take advantage of those extra prizes. And the Guzzlord that Dark is playing can help Dark's prize trade a little bit more by able to take 2 with that. You might be able to take 2 with Nice Spear. So that's just the reasons why it wouldn't be great. But other than that, I mean, you hit for Psychic Weakness on Mewtwo, depending on the board state. And then if you feel Ranger, you can get around Sonic Volume, stuff like that.
Cool. Tate, so why is Dark so good?
Yeah, so basically, I mean, same case as for last format. Like Dark is just super linear, which makes it easy to play, basically. So it's kind of just something that if you're not really confident, because we're going into a blind meta, right? It's a new format, so you want something that's going to be consistent and hard hitting and just like pretty easy. It's all just sequencing decisions, really, with that deck. So it's just kind of something that you're confident is going to like get you a bunch of wins in day one, assuming you don't hit stuff that's hard countering it. Like it should just beat most stuff, even if you hit weird stuff. So I think that's why it's good. It's just consistent and powerful.
Okay. Michael, anything to add?
I think it just has answers to everything. I think the deck, because like even against stuff like Shocklock, it has an answer with the Sabletar. You put up the Sneasel and just pass until you can Sabletar for game.
Yeah.
Like the deck has an answer to everything.
They attack you though, right?
They should attack you.
They hurt you or whatever, but
it has an answer.
Yeah.
The deck just has answers to everything. It has ways to swing prize trade with Guzzlord and Sabletar. Its Pokemon are huge, and it's faster than anything else in the format. Pretty much, you can deal 300 on turn 1, like not unreasonably. So.
Yeah, or you can just instant knockout with like a dead end.
Yeah, with dead end.
And if anything, I think it's better than last format just because of Baby Guzzlord now being able to trade with single prizer decks, which was the problem last format. You'd lose to stuff like Night March, but you might not even lose to that anymore.
Yeah, Baby Guzz is if you're playing the deck, Baby Guzz is great, but if you're not playing the deck and you're trying to beat it, Baby Guzz is a huge problem.
Right.
Will, anything to add there?
Something that Dark does really well right now, and it's done this for a long time, and like Tate said, like post bans, the deck kind of just got better, and with Cosmic. The deck has a like 3 prize, 2 prize, 1 prize strategy that decks have seen in the past. So like a couple examples in the standard format would be Pikachu and Zekrom for a while, ADP, stuff like that. And then there's been many examples in expanded as well, but Dark can just kind of go, it has the tag team option, it has the GX option, which is Darkrai GX, and it's extremely powerful. It can one-shot anything. And then last format had Mew. It still has Mew, but now you have Guzzlord as well. And Dark just has this slew of very powerful Dark attackers that, like, in this format, it just thrives. You have Elixirs and Dark Patches that accelerate everything, and just kind of makes for one powerhouse deck.
Yeah.
Yeah, you said it nicely. Okay, so is there anything on Dark that we're missing before we move on?
It's not too much to say, I don't think.
Okay. So my next question will go to Will. Can you reasonably top 8 or win the tournament if you take an auto loss to Dark?
I'm gonna say yes, based on like history. I've said it many times on this channel that you can lose to the best deck and beat everything else and still make it, as from personal experience. So I would say the same thing, yes, because historically that is true. My only concern is like sometimes dark in particular seems to be very popular. It might just be a West Coast thing, as many people say, but in Portland, I think Tate might be able to correct me on this, but I think it was like 56% of the field. And say I was playing Trev and I was confident against everything else except Dark. That's not a good not a good field I want to go into.
I don't think it was that high, but it was pretty high.
It was 25% of day one, roughly.
Yeah.
Between 20 and
Which
25,
is super high for
which is insane.
Yeah.
Nothing ever
Especially
hits that.
in expanded, that's insane.
Yeah, nothing ever hits that.
Yeah. So if you have a deck that beats literally everything except for Dark and maybe a few rogue concepts, then yeah, you could do it. But it's just hard to dodge a deck that is so popular like that. And I'm not sure what Dallas's registration numbers are. I think they're a little lower. So in a smaller regionals, it's easier to dodge decks like that. But you know, in a higher populated field where more people just bring the same deck, it's not as easy. But yeah, I would definitely say that you can bring a rogue concept or a meta counter that doesn't beat Dark but beats everything else, and you can make it far. Top 8.
I believe we might be over 400 masters. Am I correct saying that?
That's what I saw at last count. Yeah.
Because I use I use Toronto as like a base. Toronto 2018-2019 as a base to compare to a lot, since that's where Will Jenkins, who is here right now, played Trev into a Pika dominant field just to beat all the Pika counters, and was able to dodge the Pika, which was the best deck in format, and make it into top 4. But that was a much smaller tournament. I believe there was like 250. So a lot of the meta, a lot of the people there were like higher skilled and meta countering, so it wasn't like the average. It was like some of the average, but then a lot of the higher up competitors. So it was a little bit more feasible, I think, like Will was mentioning. And like something with bigger population like we might have in Dallas, there might be just so much Dark that it's not more popular than its counters.
Yeah, that's my concern, is that like normally I agree with Will. I think it's fine to if you have something that beats everything except the number 1 deck, then it's fine to bring that. But specifically for this event, I think Dark might just be played so much. If it's anything like Portland, especially with like Baby Guz existing now and making the deck maybe even better, I think it's just going to be far and away the most played deck again. So I'm not really sure I'd be comfortable taking the loss to it, just because I would be thinking I'm hitting 2 or 3 of them in day 1, and I don't want to take all those losses.
Also, as long as your matchup against said deck is not like an actual auto loss where you cannot do anything, people do make mistakes in their matchups, and you can get wins out of players that make a mistake or something. So, for example, in Richmond, I played Trevenant with Power Plants, and I had pretty much no answer to Darkrai. If they sit there with a Zoro Ninja and attach up to it every turn, I cannot win the game. So, but one of the plays that I came up with based on how my opponents were playing is if they were to like Skyfield, field their bench, and then bench a Darkrai EX with 0 energies, I go end to 1, counter to catcher it up, then put Power Plant into play. And now they can't move it. I spread 6 times to win the game.
Yeah.
And if they it's stuff like that. If they play into or they make a mistake, you can get wins out of a matchup. But like you don't want to rely on that as your answer to the matchup.
Yeah.
Michael, anything else?
I think it's fine, honestly. When like no deck, especially in expanded, decks usually don't take up a huge chunk of the meta like they can in standard, just because there's more stuff and people just want to play different stuff. This event might be slightly different, like you guys said. It probably will have a bigger share than most of the time, just because it's so dominant and people love playing Dark. But I just think it's a fine strategy in general. I did it a couple times this season playing Malamar into fields of ADP, but I don't see why it wouldn't work. You just have to try and guess your matchups and hope it goes the right way. It's a risk you take when you play in an event. If matchups don't go your way, it's an issue. But when you're losing to only the top deck, the majority of the field is going to be a good matchup for you, so you're kind of okay with that.
Yeah, cool. On to the next one. We've already touched on this, but I just wanted to solidify it a little more. What are some archetypes that can make up the counter meta? And are we strictly countering Turbo Dark when we talk about this? Tate, let's start with you.
So one thing, some players have probably seen that I've been working on with Team Gas, especially Nick Robinson and Kieran Watt, playing a lot of Lucario GX. I got a bunch of CP off cups with that in the Midwest. So that was, I kind of pitched that idea to our chat. I was like, yo, is Lucario any good? And we kind of came up with a list for it. And yeah, they did pretty well with it at some cups. So that's something that I definitely like. I think that deck is really strong because obviously the Turbo Dark matchup is very good. You still have to play smart, just because you need to hit everything every turn, but it's definitely very favorable. And then the Zorak matchup as well, I think just should be something that you're winning consistently. And then people, are kind of like, okay, what about stuff like Guardian or Rowlet Egg or whatever, stuff that you're not hitting for weakness. But the thing with those matchups is they're not one-shotting you. So you basically get a free Cantankerous Beatdown KO for 3 prizes, and then you kind of just have to basically you end them and you hope they whiff healing or whatever they need, and you get your other 3. So you kind of get there. So that's definitely like a deck that I think could be really strong into a meta of dark decks and then like tag team decks, where you get that kind of that free 3 prizes. Some of the other matchups, like the single prizer stuff, you can still win from stuff like Focus Sash, just preventing them from one-shotting you. If people are only playing like 1 blower, 0 blower, that could be really good. So Lucario is definitely something I'd be looking at as like a big counter deck that I think people will bring.
Nice. Michael.
If we're not considering like the top decks as like if we're considering only dark, I think Guardian's a pretty good play. I think most people playing dark will have a pretty hard time playing around low punny and still maintaining a good board against Guardian. I think Guardian's just very, very strong right now. And if I were gonna play one of the like counter-ish top decks, I'd play Guardian for sure. Other than that, my counter pick to the meta would be Toad Pyroar, as we talked about in an earlier video.
Mhm.
I think the deck's very strong and can beat pretty much any of the top decks, but it just does not have a chance against a lot of the anything rogue or not considered a top deck right now. It can't beat those, so that's the reason I put it to the side for now.
Reasonable. Will, any other decks that can make up the counter meta?
Yeah, I'm not really sure if this is the counter meta per se, or if it's a counter to the counter meta, but I've put a lot of time into Sableye Garbodor, and I actually have an article coming out this week on Rocket's Hideout that has my 60 on it with some other cards I've tested. And basically the way I view the deck is it kind of eats up a lot of that's not the right way to say it. It destroys a lot of the matchups where you are able to set up and get going. So like if you push Dark and Mewtwo aside, you have good matchups against pretty much everything, and then rogue decks have a really hard time dealing with like hammer spam and control type things like spamming counter catcher and stuff like that. So as a control deck, you can just kind of beat up on stuff that isn't ready to deal with control, and no one is talking about control to my knowledge. So that's another thing you have going for you. People aren't going to test against this concept. And then when it comes to Dark and Mewtwo, which I've found to be the hardest matchups, I wouldn't put them at unfavored by any means, but you have to play a lot of text to beat Mewtwo because the item lock plus weakness on Trebushes is super annoying. They can wipe your board on turn 1, so you have to play Mime or Mew. And that's just one of the struggles about Mewtwo. And then with the item lock, your deck becomes more consistent and you have to just burn, burn, burn. So you are forced to do a lot more in that matchup. And then Dark, assuming the player correctly thins their deck, your whole strategy, now that there's no like Surge, Stamp, Mars combo in Expanded, you have to end them to 1 or 2 and just kind of hope that they don't draw anything. And basically Sableye reverted back to the way it was played in Connecticut. Hartford, Connecticut. There were a few that did well there. So basically, you go guard block, you diminish their resources through the game, you spam hammers on them, and then you go end to 2, end to 1, trick shovel your top deck, make it a dead card, or hope to hit a dead card. And then as long as they don't draw like Guzma or a way to switch an attack, you pretty much win a majority of the time. Because from there, you transition into a trick shovel lock, and they can't do anything about it. Also, if a Guzma hits the discard and you lost zone it, like assuming your opponent only plays one Guzma, your odds of winning the game increase so much. So
Yeah.
that's my little tangent on a deck I've been working on a lot. And I'm not gonna lie, like if the dark player draws off the end, it's very hard to win. But I mean that's the game plan, and I wouldn't call it unfavored, but it can come down to those last couple turns whether or not you win the game.
Can I jump on that train for a second?
Go ahead.
I totally agree. I think control is actually being super underrated right now. It's not something I've personally tested, but just from looking at past results, this happens every time. We get a new ban list update or something. People are like, okay, finally control is gone. We don't have to worry about it anymore. And then Zoro control wins a regional or something, and it happens every time because people just don't respect it and they don't tech for it or play decks that can beat control. And then it's definitely like I would definitely expect to see some control decks in day 2 in Dallas. I don't know that they'll be like winning the event or anything, just because they definitely get weaker from the bans, which was the intent behind the bans. But just the fact that people aren't respecting them at all right now, from what I can tell, is really, really good for control. And I think Sable Garb, exactly like Will said, is like something that could be really good.
And Tate's spot on. Every time people don't respect control, it comes out of nowhere. And I mean, hopefully I'm not wrong for this event, but it's just kind of a trend at this point. It happens a lot. And the main reason that I like Sableye Garb over like a straight Zoro control is simply because Garbodor is really good right now. You can stop a lot of abilities like Dark Cloak and stuff like that. And that was my main reason behind it. When I tested Zoro control, it was too hard to beat Darkrai in combination with the Guzzlord taking extra prizes on your Rangaroos and stuff like that. And then geez, they just can't get off fast enough. So that's why I like the Garbodor. You kind of slow the game down, and you get to play at your pace for the most part.
I don't want to spend too much time on this, but Will, is there any merit to Sableye Dolls, or is that just a completely different deck from Sableye Garbodor?
I think it's completely different. Your objective is like, it's just a different deck, because Sableye Garb is going to try and handlock you at some point, where the doll deck just tries to mill you out through dolls.
Right. Okay. Michael, so I wanted to ask you, you've played Stall, you've built Stall in the past. Will was talking about control, but does Stall have merit at this tournament?
Not really. Stall's like there's just too many ways to deal with an expanded. Most of the time when you're stalling, it's either big HP or abilities. And with stuff like Silent Lab, Garbodor, Power Plant, there's too many ways to deal with the abilities, or every single deck has a ton of different versions of attackers. So like single prizers, not like GXs, non-tag teams, they all have answers to the different types of stall mechanics. Like the only one that has real merit is Pyroar, and it's a stage 1, so trying to build a pure stall deck around it doesn't really work too well, and most decks still do have an answer for it. And then another issue with stall, if you're trying to like play a purely stall deck, is you don't really have a draw engine, so you have to play Stevens or Greens or something. And if you're playing those cards, you're just going to get end and expanded, and your supporter did nothing, and then you have to just hope you draw into it.
Yeah, that all makes sense. Does anyone disagree?
No.
Okay. So my next question I have for you guys, is what could counter the counter meta? So if is there a trend in these counter decks we're talking about that you could use to beat like this other chunk of the meta? But I also want to throw out another thing that we haven't talked about yet. That I've seen other people working on, I've heard other people working on, I've worked on myself. Honchkrow GX, not just Honchkrow GX, but something like, if you want to take a look at Limitless TCG, Richmond, I believe 30th place, James Langley played Honchkrow Pyroar Stall with Regirox and Snorlax with the block ability. You can also use Spiritomb and has the same kind of ability. But I think that just can like really beat a lot of the stuff that both is countering dark and is just in the meta but not dark. Is there any merit to something like that? Honchkrow Pyro, you're just putting in a bunch of different win conditions against different decks. Will.
All right, so the basic question is a deck like this Wallstall kind of Honchkrow build good against everything but dark?
Yeah,
Or like
can you see it
how
happening?
could it do well?
Yeah.
I mean, sure. I mean, this goes with what we were saying about dodging dark. One of the great things about this deck, I pulled up the list just to familiarize myself real quick. Is sorry, I played Pidgeotto at a cup today. My mind is
It happens.
so the Honchkrow GX is really good right now. I'm not sure if there's a great way to utilize it other than just being kind of a wall, but like you can auto win some decks with it if you start it and like can just get it going.
Yeah.
Start the Murkrow and get the Honchkrow going. So yeah, of course there's merit to it. It's just like what we were saying. Any deck can lose to the top and beat everything else.
Cool.
Honchkrow to me feels like, because Honchkrow on its own obviously doesn't beat Dark. You need to play other stuff in the deck if you want to have a chance against Dark, and then even stuff like Pyroar doesn't necessarily beat Dark because they go Weavile. So Honchkrow feels like a deck that's like not a good pick for this event, but is maybe something like for Collinsville. Like if the meta pans out a certain way, then you have a better idea of like if you're going to play against a lot of stuff that Honchkrow actually beats. But it doesn't feel like a good pick for a blind meta for me, just because like anything that's like a turbo deck is just going to run over it.
Okay.
People also brought like a quad Honchkrow kind of turn one handlock deck to Richmond, and obviously we don't have the handlock stuff anymore, but that deck relied on hitting its good matchups, and then even then with your handlock combo, you rarely beat the turbo decks.
Yeah.
So a Honchkrow based deck would definitely have an issue with that.
Yeah.
With that said, I honestly maybe expect to see one in day 2 in Dallas, just because I do think people are going to play it, and I think it's going to get lucky and hit all the right matchups and make day 2, but it's not a good play, I don't think.
Cool. Okay, so are there any like I was saying about the counter to the counter meta, or do you see any trends like pointing towards one of the decks we've talked about just being a better play than people think, or any archetypes that have been expanded that are kind of under the radar right now that could just have really great matchup spreads if things pan out a certain way? Anything of that sort?
One thing that I know has been getting a bit of hype recently is because of Stefan's article that he posted. So people have been talking about Tina Chomp and expanded, and Stefan's version that he put on Poke Beach was like Tina Chomp and Kofa Grigus. I don't know how to pronounce it. The thing that puts damage counters. So you get like the turn 2 Kofa Grigus, and then you get like you do 240 or whatever. And then he also played Noivern GX. So that's something that I think really makes the deck good, is like if you have Noivern in there and you can special energy lock stuff, that's like you basically just have all your bases covered. You can either go like super turbo mode, hit a ton of damage, or you can go for like a control route. And obviously you get to play all the stuff like, Mysterious Treasure, Tag Call, all that kind of stuff in there. So I think that's a deck that could show up in Dallas and do really well.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, that actually, I like how that sounds like countering the meta, because you have Tina Chomp to one-shot the tag teams, and then you have Noivern to take care of most of the single prize matchups because they're usually special energy based.
Right.
So yeah, that doesn't sound bad at all. Anything else, Michael or Will?
As for underrepresented decks, just peek around. Like no one's talking about it, and the deck just has really, really good matchups right now. Like Norgarb's favorable, Dark's favorable, Eggrout's almost an auto win. Guardian super favorable. Just people like they're trying to be too cute, and they're playing stuff like Tapu Koko GX, which like in theory is very, very good against Dark because you do get the one shot, but you should actually just never use it in that matchup, because you need to use Tag Bolt to swing the prize trade in your favor, or they're winning every single time.
Yeah.
Or they're like choosing to go first against Dark, and then they stumble for one turn, or they have to bet a Shaman, and Dark gets the Guzzlord knockout on turn 2 to win the game. And you need to be going second in that type of matchup. Like people just like it's hard. It's a hard deck to know how to play correctly in certain matchups, and the list needs to be pretty teched right now with stuff like either Captivating Pokepuff or Target Whistle to make sure they have GXs on their board at all times. And then stuff like Scoop Up Cyclone and Cassius to have healing options against decks that are two-shotting like Gardevoir or Agrow, or even Ultra Necro does give you a chance against.
Yeah, I like it.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, it is.
Will, anything, or should we move on to the next question?
Just like underrepresented decks. This going into this week, I plan on messing around with Archie's Blastoise only because it hasn't been talked about a lot. I don't necessarily think the deck is good, but I mean, just want to cover all my bases. And then looking at Hartford, like I mentioned, Sableye. Some of the decks that were in Hartford that like aren't being talked about a ton. There's Shocklock, which it's kind of a special deck because you need to have beaches to play it, and not everyone has access to that. But like Shocklock is a deck. Hitmonchan is in there, which I don't think is great, but it could come back. It's a fighting type that has ability prevention, so that's good. Then there's Sableye Garb, Pikachu, Zekrom is all over this limitless page, and like Night March decks. So those are some of the decks that I could see coming in and doing something.
Yeah, I keep telling myself not Hitmonchan.
Yeah.
That deck's so bad.
Yes.
I've never liked that deck. I played it to Hartford and I was so sad.
I played it to Greensboro and I was sad.
Because your deck doesn't do anything. You do 50 damage.
It doesn't do a whole lot of damage. You're right.
Like Donphan did good damage for when it was around.
Mm-hmm.
Hitmonchan's like, I'll do 50 to your Guardy.
Okay, so
You do 50 to Mewtwo and they damage change you every turn.
Yeah.
All right, so our next question is, which 5 archetypes do you think there will be most of in day 2? Let's start with Will, and then we'll go Tate, then Michael. The 5 most popular decks for day 2.
Okay, well, picking the meta decks is usually pretty safe. I do want to include Pikachu Zekrom. I think that deck is going to make a splash among the people that play it, or choose to bring it. So I would say Dark Pika for sure. And then if I'm wrong on Pika, oh well. I think Guardian could do good. I honestly don't think Egg Rallet's going to be great, and I would say Ultra Necrozma because I really like that deck, and I think that it's, well, me liking it is not a good example for why it's good, but I mean, it's a fast deck. It reminds me a lot of Zapdos. It has turn 1 Silent Lab, so I want to believe that the deck is really strong, but if you look at the cup results for all the expanded things, it's like nowhere to be found.
Yeah.
So I would say Ultra Necrozma, but I'm honestly not sure if it's even good in this field based on the cup results. I could be completely wrong, but so Guardy, Dark, Pika, and then I would say I think Mewtwo is probably gonna come in numbers, and then I would leave 5th to just like control things. If like for example, if Dead Draw Gaming's group, well, like that's not even their name anymore. If the gang group brings some control archetype that's really good, they could all make it, and that would take up a portion.
A good chunk. Yeah.
Yeah. And then, Shocklock. I'm going to group Shocklock, Sableye, Zoroark control, any controlling wall stall stuff like that. That could make a splash. So
Yeah, I feel that. Tate, go ahead.
That's exactly what I was going to do, actually, was like my number, any kind of stall, Shocklock. Sable Garb is probably better than Zoro control, like Will said. But number 1, I'll go with Turbo Dark, like I've been saying. I think that's just, people are just going to play that because it's good, it's easy, it's consistent. And then probably Zoro Garb, like people just like that deck. It has a ton of proven results, and it's another thing that's just consistent. You could throw a lot of techs in there, so you can kind of pick and choose like different strategies for what matchups you expect. So people will probably just play a lot of Zoro. Guardian is another thing that's just like pretty easy to play, has pretty good matchups. You can kind of just win stuff from like tanking and having Silent Lab or whatever. And then probably Mewtwo. I think people will that's a deck where like people, kind of like with Zoro Garb, people appreciate the flexibility of like the different techs you could put in there. And it's a very high skill cap deck, so there's a lot of potential to outplay people in different matchups with Mewtwo.
Cool. Michael, so Will and Tate's answers I think were pretty similar, so I want to change it up for you. What decks do you think can make top 8 at this tournament? Not necessarily give me the exact top 8, but what are some of the decks you think have the best potential to go that far?
Dark will be in there for sure. There's just going to be too much of it for it not to make it. I'd say Pico probably will get in there. I think Shocklock will be in top 8 more than likely. Night March has a good chance, I think, to make it through. I think Mewtwo will be there in numbers, but I think that deck kind of sucks. So, like, I don't think it'll make top 8, but it could for sure. Probably some, like, Guardian or Aggro style deck that just big and heals. Yeah, Control probably will get there. Someone will figure something out and get there with Control. And that's probably about it. And then just maybe someone sneaks in with something quirky like Archie stores, but who knows?
Fossils.
So this is kind of a question I've like been mulling over as we go. There's so many decks to choose from, right? And we've touched on that's the reason why it's hard for one archetype to take up such a big chunk in the meta and expand it. So not only is there a lot of decks to choose from, but Turbo Dark is so popular and so obvious, and there's an appeal to trying to beat the best deck. Do you think like a lot of people are going to switch off of Dark and go into a Dark counter? What do you guys think about that? Like, there's a lot of like ways to go when you're thinking about this. Like, people bought the cards for Dark, they just stick with it. People see Dark, so everybody switches to fighting, and now we have a fighting dominant meta. Michael, do you have any thoughts on that?
Probably not. Like, Dark's, I think even the fighting counter decks are like, Dark can still beat them, like if the Dark player plays well. The Dark's just overall the best deck. It has answers to everything, like I said. It has multiple win conditions. It can deck you out. It's just like, it just trades better than anything else simply because it hits harder than and faster than anything else and is just huge.
Yeah, Dark's pretty crazy. Tate, do you have any? Oh,
I guess not.
Hey Tate. Did you have anything to add about Dark and people maybe switching off or switching to other decks, or maybe just not playing Dark at all and it's just being hyped?
I think I agree with Katrin. I think like Dark is just, so I think if you're playing meta for this event, you've probably already decided that, and you've just been like practicing a deck and learning all the matchups. So if that's like Dark, Guardian, Mewtwo, even like Ultra Necrozma. So I think anyone who thinks that Dark is like the play is just sticking with Dark. And I think people tend to overthink this stuff a lot, where people start to go like rock, paper, scissors, like, oh, what if people start playing Lucario? Then maybe I like play Mewtwo or something. But it doesn't actually usually work out quite that clean cut in practice. Usually, like, if people think Dark is good, then just a lot of people play Dark and it does well. It usually is simple.
For Richmond, I do know that like Dark was hyped up, but then a lot of people started switching off of Dark because of Buzzgarb and Night March. But I don't think that works the same way here.
Yeah.
Like we were talking about, we have Guzzlord now, and Guzzlord fixes a lot of problems. It doesn't make you win your unfavorables, but it makes your unfavorables like evenish now, right?
Yeah.
Will, anything else on that?
I agree with what you just said. I remember for Richmond, I was like super on Zoro Handlock or like controls, very similar, or actually exactly what Isaiah Bradner played to Richmond.
Yeah.
And then there's that week before, and there was a few expanded cups, and then all of a sudden, Buzzgarb Power Plant and Night March Power Plant just came out of nowhere.
Yeah.
And we would test those matchups, and Let Loose Power Plant just destroyed the control deck setup. So like, for this time around, I haven't seen anything like that in the in the League Cups, where a certain archetype or two just comes out of nowhere that has a really good matchup against Dark in a very like in a high concentration. You know, there might be a few Lucarios at a League Cup, but there aren't like 7 Lucarios in a League Cup.
Yeah, that one New Jersey Cup the week before when
it was like 4 or 5 Night March, and then I cut Night March. I was playing the same deck as Justin.
Yeah.
I cut in my area. So yeah, there wasn't like we don't have that effect this time. So I'm not sure that an archetype will arise out of nowhere.
Yeah.
I mean, it could be the same thing. People might still bring Buzzgarb and still bring Night
Yeah.
March and still bring Hitmonwob. I just don't think they're as effective as they were. And we lost Let Loose, which were huge to Buzzgarb. And, like, that was the whole thing. Like, Let Loose plant. Now I have a mediocre deck and I'm going to smack you. That was
For
the
sure.
whole thing. Okay, so let's start wrapping it up here. Why don't you give me your top 3 plays? Of course, no leaks. Don't throw your IP out here just for anyone to pick up. And then go ahead and shout out your team, your sponsors, your testing groups, whatever it is. Michael, so go ahead. Your top 3 picks and your shout outs.
I'm more than likely playing Pikarom, but my other 2 picks would be Guardian and Toad Pyroar. Then I guess shout out to NRG for sponsoring me, and shout out to Joe Rudiger and the Bradner family. This event definitely would not be possible without them.
Tate?
Top 3 probably Lucario, Turbo Dark, Mewtwo. Yeah. Shout out to Team Gentlemen and Scholars. Love testing with those guys and hoping I get some results for our team pretty soon. And also shout out to everyone who's been supporting PokeStats. Obviously, we've got the new Facebook for event result reporting, so that's been really successful. So definitely thank you guys for helping out with all that stuff.
Will?
I'd say my top 3 for the event are Pikachu, Zekrom, Sableye Garb, and as much as I hate to say it, Darkrai. I feel like if I can build a list that I'm comfortable in mirror with, I mean, it's like best deck, anything's possible. So that would be my choice, as much as I hate to say that. And then shout out to Team Rocket's Hideout, the PTC Joe store, where you can use code Jenkins5 at checkout for 5% off your order. And yeah, that's all for me. And thank you to you, Luke, for having us on.
Yeah, of course.
Thanks,
Yeah,
Luke.
thank you all for coming on to talk about Dallas. I definitely think Dallas is a bit confusing.
Oh, yeah.
It's a bit of a confusing one. We just got 9 new cards banned, a new set, and it's expanded format, so it's always fun. So thank you all for coming on to talk about this. Thank you to everyone for watching. Subscribe if you enjoyed the content. Good luck in Dallas. Hopefully I'll see you there. And I will see you next time here on Celio's Network.